Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever it is you are tuning in from. My name is Garrett. If you are new here, welcome. I love to see where everybody is at in the chat here. So if you want to just type in where you're tuning in from, I see Finland, I see Munich, I see San Diego, New Hampshire, Portugal, Canada. We got folks from all over the place. So thank you so much for being here and spending a little bit of time with us. Again, if you are new here, let me introduce you to kind of who I am, what we're doing here. Light Panels has been kind enough to ask me to host a series on how we shoot certain things. And this one I'm really, really excited about because, of course, it is Halloween here in America. And it may be wherever you are celebrating as well. So we are looking at 3 iconic scenes from Stranger Things today. We're going to reverse engineer the lighting, talk about how we went through and produced that. And then, of course, everybody's favorite part, which is today we are giving away a Gemini 1x1 soft along with a DOP Choice snapback. It is a great lighting kit. It is one that I use all of the time, and it would be a marvelous addition to anybody's lighting setup. So we will be announcing the winner of that toward the end of the stream, and it will be somebody picked at random by the Light Panels team out of the folks who are actively live and viewing this. So if you do want a chance to win one of those, stick around to the end because that's when we're going to be doing that. Hello from Mexico, Philly, SoCal, San Fran, Denmark, Belgium, Wyoming. We've got people all over Estonia. We've got folks from everywhere. I'm so glad you guys are here. A couple of housekeeping things before we dive in today. One, our next live stream is also going to be a scene recreation, and I am still kind of working through what scene or scenes from an iconic movie we want to do. So if you have suggestions, I'm open to suggestions here. The Light Panels team is going to be taking notes in the chat, so if there's any particular type of scene or a movie or thing that you want to see recreated, feel free to throw comments into the chat. If at any point in time you have questions through this, I will do my best to keep up with questions live as they come in. That said, there are quite a few of us in here today. So if you could do me a favor and use the Q&A module when you ask a question, there will be a bar at the bottom of your Zoom preview window there that will say Q&A. If you go through and put in your questions there, it's going to be easier for me to see your question and answer it as we move on. 2 quick things. One, if you don't win the Light Panels Gemini 1x1 soft today, no worries. There's a couple of other ways that you can get it. We're going to be doing another one of these giveaways in December with our holiday special. So in addition to, of course, suggesting scenes that we can do for movies, tune into that next one for another chance to win. There is also another option here that they are kindly doing. There is another giveaway happening for a 1x1 and a 2x1 kit, each respectively. They will throw a link up there in the chat right there. So that competition ends on November 8th. So you can win one today, you can win one on the 8th, you can win one in December. We got a lot of ways that you can win and get your hands on some of these lights. If you want to use these lights as badly as I do and as often as I do, they are also running a promo right now where you can get, I believe it's up to 26% off between now and December 15th. So if you're in the market and you're buying a light, no better time to buy a Gemini than now because you can get up to 26% off of those fixtures. All right, with all of that housekeeping out of the way, I do want to kind of catch some of the folks up who may be new here and remind some of the folks who have been here in the past. One of the things that we talk about a lot in cinematography is that the single most important thing that affects your image or makes your image the dreaded word cinematic, right, always comes down to lighting. And one of the best tools a cinematographer can have in their toolkit when they're starting out is to learn how to figure out how to reverse engineer lighting. And what I mean by that is looking at something, a show, a movie, a scene, a shot, and being able to identify, look at how it's lit, where those lights are positioned, what type of light or behavior of light that is, and then use that information to inform what you're doing. And that is precisely what we have done here today. So I want to briefly kind of go over how we do that and then go into the scenes that we are talking about. So the three scenes that we are looking at today, the first is going to be the void. If you are familiar with the show Stranger Things or the lore of Stranger Things, that is that limbo space, that liminal space where it's entirely black with the water floor where Eleven kind of goes to when she's trying to psychically find people, right? So we're going through and doing that. The next scene we're looking at is closing the portal, which was kind of at the end of season 2, where we have Eleven kind of fighting the not the mind flayer, the other one, the big spider looking one that comes over the top. And then the last one, and my favorite one that we're going to be talking about today, we are going to be looking at the can crushing scene from season 1. Where Eleven psychically crushes the Coca-Cola can with her mind. So we're going to be doing those 3 scenes today. The first piece that I want to look at here is going to be this sequence. So this is the void, right? This is the piece that we are first going to be trying to recreate. A couple of things going on here. Obviously, we have this kind of infinity pool look. We did not have the time nor the budget to put one of those together. So I will show you guys how we went through and recreated that. But if we look at this and we kind of examine the way that this is lit, we have this infinite black, right? Which means that there is no light on the backdrop that's behind our subject here. And we also have this top-down lighting. So it's soft, yet it's focused. We have hard shadows, but they're not so harsh that the lighting is going to be hard lighting. It's just letting us know that the intensity of the lighting is fairly high. And we're not completely top down. We're coming back onto our subject just a little bit here. So a couple of things as we're kind of breaking this down. We need a soft light. It's got to be overhead, but not directly overhead. It needs to be tilted back toward our talent, but not so much so that it's hitting the backdrop behind us. Okay, so that's kind of the way that we're going through and looking at that. So with that in mind, let's take a look at how we did on recreating the void. All right, so that's kind of the shots that we picked. That's kind of the way that we went through and did it. And a couple of things that I want to break down in terms of how we went about doing it. The first is we used a 2x1 Gemini soft. That was our main fixture that we put on a booming combo stand up overhead, and we augmented that with a bounce coming up off of the floor. We then used cinefoil and kind of treated that as a barn door so we could shape the light to where it's coming down on our subject without necessarily interfering with the backdrop, resulting in, of course, this type of shot here, using a Dana dolly for the pull there. But you can see here that we have that reflection, that same kind of water pooling on the floor. Obviously, we were just shooting on a paper backdrop, so we did not fill a pool with, 1.5 inches of water or whatever. So all we did was I just took the same footage, masked our subject out, flipped them over, and then did a displacement map in After Effects, which gave it that ripply water effect, which makes it look as though they're standing in water. And because the character movements and the camera movements are very subtle and very stable, the effect works really well. If we're doing high action sequences where there's going to be like big splashes in the feet and things, that wouldn't work there. But for the way that Eleven interacts with the void and the way that we had our subject kind of moving through that space, it worked really, really well for us. So if we want to look at the lighting plot here, this is how we had this set up, right? So you can see We have our 12-foot backdrop kind of here. This is that infinite black that we go there. Over here, this is the booming combo stand. It's just a standard combo stand that has the arm that kind of comes out and over. With the 2x1 Geminis, all the 2x1 Geminis are baby pin. They are junior pin. So you would use those with a combo stand versus something like a C stand or a traditional light stand, because that pin is going to be thicker, because of course the fixture itself is larger. So going back to this real quick here. Glenn, yeah, cinefoil is an incredible barn door. It's great for shaping any sort of light. It does not, it's not expensive. You can reuse it over and over. And especially with LED fixtures, it's super easy to just gaff the cinefoil to the light. You don't have to worry about heat, and you can shape it exactly how you want to. I highly recommend everybody has a roll of cinefoil in their grip kits. A very inexpensive way of doing a lot of light shaping work, which is really awesome. Okay, going back to this here, you can see here we have the 2x1 Gemini overhead, right? If this was a little more accurate, the light's a little bit more in front of our subject because, again, it is tilted down and back toward our subject, with our cinefoil helping eliminate any spill that might end up here on the barn door. And that was it. It was a single source lighting setup. We used the red Komodo and the Dana Dolly. There we go. We used the red Komodo and the Dana Dolly here just to get the camera movements that we wanted. Sometimes we kept it locked off, sometimes we kept it moving, but overall, a very, very simple lighting setup. Now, that is not how the Stranger Things folks shot theirs. They were working in a much larger space, not with a 12-foot paper backdrop, and they had multiple fixtures in line, tilted forward and coming back like that. This is obviously a much more approachable way of achieving that same type and style of lighting. But if you were to do any more action than simple kind of walking and standing, you would definitely want to line multiple fixtures up across that. And you could either use standard scaffolding or you could use multiple combo stands. It's entirely up to you how you want to grow your kit out. But this is a very simple and approachable way of getting that same effect. Okay. Again, if you have any questions through any of this, any comments, anything that you kind of want to add to it, please do use that Q&A module. I am going to open this up for Q&A at the end, where we can talk about all sorts of things that you want to talk about, as long as they're somewhat tangentially related to filmmaking. But if there's things in the moment that you guys want to key into, that's the best way that I will see it there. Okay? So that was the Void. Simple, single light source, overhead. The biggest kind of component there is light behavior and then light position, right? We don't want them to be silhouettes, so the light can't be behind them. We don't want it to be this completely top-down light where we lose all facial detail, which would be directly overhead. So it is in front of, kicked back, and then shaping that light down to make sure it doesn't hit the background. Okay? That was the easiest one. Now we get into a little bit more of the fun stuff. The next one that we wanted to tackle would be here. Here we go. Elliot asked a quick question here. Elliot said, wouldn't the lights need to be placed more towards the camera so the water would not reflect them? Yes and no. So if you're going to be using real practical water, you would want the lights to be mounted much higher in the air. We had ours mounted probably about 8 feet, maybe 10 feet in the air, right? It was just high enough that our combo stand could get up and over. Our talent was very small, so we were able to kind of work in a much tighter environment, right? That studio isn't necessarily set up for that same kind of thing. But if you were to get build a frame and put live water and all of that in, you would want those lights to be significantly higher, and then drop probably duvetine to act as your flag to prevent it from going onto the backdrop. And that height is what's going to affect your angle. You wouldn't want it so far forward that it's going to eliminate that liminal space vibe, right? Like the whole thing with the way that this looks, and if we kind of go back to this here, with the way that this looks is that they want it to look as though there is no specific light source. There is just this infinite space in which people exist in a void of nothingness, right? So if we kick the light too far forward, we're going to light them in a way that's almost more pleasing, and it's not going to be quite as dramatic as keeping it just in front of above them, also helping eliminate that background spill. So great question, great point. You would just expand that space. One of the things we talk about in this series is the idea of lighting spaces and not faces, and that's how you would do it, is you would make it bigger and further away. How would you get the fill if it was practical water? Brian, great question. So if we are going to be creating a bathtub situation, right, and that is, if you go through and you watch any of the behind the scenes of how they actually shot it, right, they're standing in, I think it's a ½ inch or maybe an inch of water. It's almost nothing, right? So they have this big thing. If you're doing that, you can fly bounce in anywhere you want to, as long as it's not interfering with the camera. So you could Hollywood it, right, where you would have somebody actually physically moving it along with the camera. You could have it positioned alongside the camera. So if you were using something like a J. Fisher dolly or a track dolly of some kind, where you had it like on a cart, something not quite like a Dana, but a full dolly rig, you could take that bounce and actually move it with the camera. There's a lot of places that you can use it, but even with the practical setting, right, if you were to actually put it in a bathtub, you would still be doing a lot of post-compositing, right? So out of this whole frame here, they're just using this kind of middle, maybe fourth of the frame, right? And that's all going to be composited out and made much smaller, so it's much more controllable in how you create that kind of infinite or liminal space. So in our shots, right, if we're going here, let me see if I can pull up one of these here, right? So if we go here with one of our shots, this one, there we go, right? The only part of our subject that I'm actually using is just a soft kind of garbage mat that's about roughly the size of him, maybe 10% larger, right? And the rest of that's all composited in After Effects to give us kind of that infinite space, and allows me to like move things around and reframe with 3D cameras and that kind of thing. They would do something extremely similar even if they were shooting practically. Okay, there we go. Wonderful. Caught up, moving on. Now we're on to this one, okay? So this is where we sit there and we're in the closing the portal scene, okay? So this is where 11 is closing the scene between the two worlds of the Upside Down and our world here. And let me show you how we did it. So that's us closing the portal. Karthik, I see your question. I'll circle back to that. Let me get through this, and then we'll kind of get back to that one there. So obviously all the floaty bits and things are all done in post. Of the three, this one has the most involved lighting. So the way that we lit this one is we used both Gemini 1x1 and 2x1 softs. The 2x1 was put inside a Octo 5 from DOP Choice, which is a 5-foot octagon softbox with a grid on it. We then use the two 1x1 Geminis on the pulse setting to give us a lot of that kind of fill and thunderous kind of lighting effect. I built this really terrible frame that we could use through to kind of match the way that the booth looked in the show. And then just with a little bit of alpha compositing here with our floaty bits, we're able to get that final aesthetic, okay? The reason, by the way, we use grids, even if we're going to be using a very soft or diffused light source, is because it does not change the behavior of our light. It allows that light to remain soft, but it also then helps direct that light. So DOP Choice makes fantastic accessories, among which is one of the ones that you can win later in this live stream. But if you need to control spill, right, which we wanted a very directional yet soft light, we used a very large light source in comparison to our subject, which I think that our light source is actually larger than our subject is tall. And then the grid keeps that very focused, allowing us then to get these nice effect fills on either side with the 1x1s. All the Geminis are RGBWW lights, meaning that we can key in any color that we want to or effect that we want to. So we were able to dial in a really nice, pretty red to give us that look, and then be able to fill that in with the pulses coming through the effects on either side. And if we look, you can see here, this is the original, and this is then how we went through and shot it. So you can see here our framing and our lighting and things get really close. We get some of the floaty bits, right? All of that kind of thing. But the if you're trying to reverse engineer lighting, the two things that are going to be fastest in helping you understand the lighting that we're trying to match things to. One is we look at shadows. Shadows will tell us far more about a light than trying to identify any sort of lighting itself. We look for both the direction of that shadow, because shadows point towards lights, so you'll be able to see a shadow, follow that line up, and know where that fixture is supposed to be. It will also indicate what the behavior of that light is. If it's a hard line, it's going to be harsh light. If it is a soft gradient line, it is going to be soft light. So it lets us know both position and behavior of our light very, very quickly. The second thing that you look for is you look in the eyes. Eyeballs, because they are wet, are always reflecting or mirroring the type of light or light source that you then will be trying to mimic. So if we actually look into the pupils of the eyes of 11 right here, okay, we can see that we have a main key right in front of the iris, and then we have a side fill kind of on camera side here. And then if you look here at ours, we kind of have the same thing looking in the eyeballs there. Karthik asks, what if we shoot in white light and in post we create the red tint? 100%, absolutely you can do that. If you choose to shoot in color, right, or full color, and then grade it to be monochromatic in one hue, that's great. But make sure that you are using a monitor that is going to be able to give you independent channel waveforms or a wave parade. Those kind of waveforms are going to let you know where all of your color channels are sitting. Some cameras, especially cameras with more limited dynamic range, are going to have less latitude, especially when we're talking about the red channel, right? Blue is most sensitive, red is second most sensitive, and green is the most forgiving. So if you're in a camera situation where the color itself is clipping that color channel, 100% shoot it with traditional white light, then make it monochromatic, and then add your color tint over the top of it. It is a perfectly acceptable workflow to do it that way. Brian says, I noticed the shadows on the image on the left that was just on screen has much gentler shadows than the one on the right. Can I speak to that? Yeah, Brian, it's my terrible iPad. It looks really cool for me when I'm looking at it here versus what they're doing there. Now, both of these are shot on red cameras. So their version, I can't remember which one, if it was the Helium or the Monstra that they were shooting on. And then we're shooting on the Komodo here. Also, depending on the screen grab of where I pulled it from, I could be in the middle of one of those pulses or whatnot. But yes, you're 100% right, where on this, I look a little purple, and then those don't quite match up there. So that's a me problem. I will be posting. I've posted some stuff on Instagram. I'll post a little bit more about this on Instagram. So if you want to follow me over there, for as terrible as the compression on Instagram is, the color rendition is still better. So I would check that out there. I'm also going to be making a YouTube video about kind of more of the production side of things, not as much about the lighting, but more on the lensing and that kind of thing. That's going to go on my YouTube channel. So feel free to follow me over there for that. Okay. So, any other questions on this one before we move on, right? The two key pieces here, especially if we're trying to talk about really direct, and let's kind of key it over here. There we go. We'll go to this one. Really direct, but really soft lighting, right? anytime we are talking about softening our lights or diffusing our lights, what we're really talking about doing is increasing the surface area of whatever our light fixture is, whatever that source is. Because the larger the surface area, in contrast to our subject, the softer that light will appear, right? Those of you who've been on this before, we've talked about it before. The sun, very, very, very big. Problem is, it's very far away. So if you look up in the sky, the sun is about the size of a dime. When we're talking about a light source that relative to the subject, me, the person standing in the sun, a dime-sized light source is very, very small, meaning that the shadows are going to be really harsh, that the light is going to be very, very harsh, that we're going to have a very intense lighting setup in terms of behavior in addition to intensity. Whereas if we have a cloudy day and we are actually taking the surface area of the sun from the size of a dime to that of the entirety of the available sky to us, we're going to have much softer, more indirect lighting simply because the relative surface area of that light to the subject is much, much larger. So we're doing the same thing, right? We can adjust the amount of diffusion, whether we're using quarter stop, eighth, half stop, full stop, magic cloth, whatever we choose to use to diffuse, we can adjust it that way. But what we're really doing is taking a smaller fixture, in this case a 2x1, and making it a much larger fixture, which is a 5-foot octagon, which is then, of course, what's going to change that behavior. Okay, the third, I'll just show you this real quick here while we're here. So this is the way that we had this set up, right? So we're on that same black background. We have our subject kind of more pulled away than we did on the first one. And for this, we had the 5-foot octagon from DOP Choice, the 2x1 Gemini Soft. And then kind of on the 30-degree angles, we had the two Gemini 1x1 softs, both set to the pulse effect, but all keyed into the same HSI color metric to make sure that we had the exact type of red that we really, really wanted to dial in. All right. Third, Colin's got a question. What is the reason for using the softs over having the latitude of the hard fixtures? Just showcasing the softs. We owned a 2x1 soft for years. Love that thing. Just curious. Great question, Colin. So there are two things when we are talking about fixtures, even if we're talking about panel fixtures of the same relative size, right? We have the intensity, which of course the hard fixtures are more intense in terms of brightness or output than the softs. But the reason they're also named that, at least light panels, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the reason why they're named that in my own personal experience is also the behavior of light. Because the way that those lights, the LED diodes and the panels in front of them are engineered, they produce a harder light than what we wanted to go for. So yeah, if you have a hard, can you use it in place of a soft? Sure, but you're going to want to make sure that you're adjusting your diffusion accordingly because you want that behavior of light. All of the behavior of light of everything we're doing in all three setups today is soft lighting. So I used softs because, I have both. I've got the hards and the softs, but I used softs because that's the type of light that I wanted. Where I find the hards really, really, really shine is if I am supplementing daylight, sunlight, more intense light, both in terms of brightness, but also in terms of behavior. So great, great question. Did the camera operator cast a shadow? Brian, very good question. This was a thing that we actually had to work on set because yes, when we started, we weren't getting the lighting that we wanted, and it is because Q, who was our DP for this shoot, he was 100% casting a shadow. He's a full-size person, where of course our subject is a much shorter individual on account of he's 7. So yes, and the way that we got around that is because everything in that sequence was locked off, we simply pressed record, stepped out, and let that light shine kind of over the camera. So our operator actually was off camera for those, at least the ones that were directly in front of that light fixture, for that exact reason. The inverse is also true though, which is kind of fun. If I come over here and I'll cue this up for you here, you come over here. when we were messing around with the reverse, this one was also a really fun shot because, and I'll pause this here, because we shot directly into that Octo 5 from DOP Choice. We just simply took the grid off. So there's no post-compositing of the color. This color rendition is exactly what was coming off of the fixture. We just took the grid off to get that look. And then if you're into After Effects, all we did is we created a Luma matte and we masked out the hand because it was silhouetted, and then we were able to add all of this really nice, cool, sparking flicker in post without it kind of going over the top. But yeah, so we did have to move our camera up to make that make sense. He was on camera for later, so like for this shot here, obviously he could be on camera because he was not in the way of any of the fixtures. But for these shots in particular, he absolutely had to step out of frame just to make those work. Okay? Let's see here. Just placing the camera in front of the light, put shadows on the object. Great question. We just answered that for Brian. Let's see here. Can we place a hard light far from an object just to be used as a soft light without a diffuser? Counterintuitive. The further you pull a light away from your subject, okay, there's two things that happen simultaneously. One, that relative surface area gets smaller. So the further away we go, the more hard that light is going to behave because the relative surface area is decreased. That said, the spread of that light is more even. So if we're trying to illuminate a backdrop, right, if our lights are too close, they're going to be really sourcey. If we back those lights up, that spread is going to be more even, and it's going to be more even on our backdrop. But if we're lighting individuals or people or subjects and we want that light to be soft, we need to increase surface area as opposed to decrease surface area. So you could use a brighter fixture and pull it further away to get the right amount of intensity, but you would then want to throw up some sort of diffusion between your light fixture and your subject to again increase that surface area so we can change the behavior of that light. But great question there. Jared says here, so with these plots, there doesn't seem to be much grip or shaping present. Are you doing these without flags or nets, or are they just not on the plot? Jared, great question. So one of the things that I try to do with all of these, right, so including closing the portal here, one of the things that I try to do with all of the things in this series is I try to make it as accessible as possible, right? Not everybody has access to a ton of grip, GNE, a half-ton truck, whatever. So I try to keep it as simple and easy as possible. Everything that we are using, I put on the plots. So if we're using a bounce, I throw the bounce on there. If we are using negs or flags or duvetine or whatever, I try to put all of that in there. But my goal is to get as close as possible with these things with the fewest resources we can to help encourage as many folks as want to be able to recreate these kind of looks. So yeah, as we use them, and then in the third one I'll show you here, you know, we kind of throw those in. But yeah, we use very, very limited grip and rigging just to keep it accessible for folks here. What wide lens was used for the arm shot? That was a 24 mil that we used. So we were using the new Siri lenses. They're Nighthawks, which are all 1.2. That's what the YouTube video is going to be, kind of more about lensing and that kind of thing. But we shot wide for that, obviously, because my dude's got really short little arms. So that was with the 24 for that guy. Glenn says, do you have a workaround for any chromatic aberration shooting directly into the Octobox? Glenn, you noticed that. Yeah, so as with most things, chromatic aberration, and you're going to see some of that again in the next one, really comes down to lens quality more than anything else, right? So like the more expensive the lens that you use, the more precise the engineering is, and the more exact the color representation is. If you are going to be using more affordable glass, right, like those series, or if you're using Rokinons or vintage photo lenses or whatever, you use more affordable glass, stopping down goes a long way. So instead of shooting really wide open, stopping that down allows some more precision within that engineering. That said, I am not a post-production specialist, so I am not qualified or capable of doing really intense color grades or really intense like lens corrections and that kind of thing. It's outside of my wheelhouse. I'm much more of a production guy, and I then pay people to do the rest of that. But yes, there is chromatic aberration. That is kind of the name of the game when you're talking about some of the more affordable glass. Roberto says, was the whole set blacked out in order to shoot the scene? Yeah, so we were shooting in a studio. The studio is an infinite cyc studio, right? So it has kind of the wraparound walls and the floor and everything. It's a green screen studio, so we blacked everything out ourselves in terms of pulling black curtain around, laying black cloth on the floor, and then having the black backdrop over the top of that. But because it is a studio, it is fully light controlled. So all of the house lights were off. There are no windows, there are no doors that let light in. So yeah, we had full light control over all three of those setups. Great questions. I love these questions. All right, the third and most infamous or famous scene of our setup today. Brian, I use, real quick here, Brian, I use Photoshop, and I use a library of objects from, I bought them, they're called film set objects, and you can just put it right in your Adobe library, and they have all sorts of grip, rigging, cameras, lights, fixtures, modifiers, all that kind of stuff. So I just build it in Photoshop. I just kind of drag and drop. It's a really, really easy way of putting together really nice lighting plots. So good question there. Shout out to those guys. They make great stuff. Okay, this one, season one of the most iconic scenes of Stranger Things, and absolutely the most intimidating to recreate. We got close. We didn't get exact. I'll explain that here in a little bit. But again, if we try to reverse engineer this lighting, right? If we're looking at this, I'm going to switch to this one. Bink. If we reverse engineer the lighting here, right, we can tell that the lighting is coming down from here. So we know that the light is high, and we know that the light is above but off camera to camera left. We know that it's direct, but if we look at the shape of the shadows, we do have kind of a softer gradation coming from one side to the other. These aren't super, super crispy lines. You can tell that it is intense lighting, right? We are getting bags under the eyes. We are getting direct shadows under the headpiece here, but they are not really harsh or crispy shadows. Like we look down here at the Coke can, again, betraying the direction of the light as being up here, but again, a softer shadow letting us know that it is softer light. This wall back here and this wall back here are darker in terms of exposure than the table in our subject, which lets us know that they are flagging off that background, right? So we do have a soft yet directional lighting source, okay? So with that in mind here, let me show you the third and final scene that we set out to recreate. That's how we did. Peter, you're asking all the right questions. We're going to get into that in just a second here. So I'm not forgetting about you. You're asking the question I'm leading right into. Okay, so that was how we went through and shot it. I know that in Stranger Things, the actual show, all of the can crushing was done with CGI. I didn't use CGI because, again, not that kind of a filmmaker. So we went through and we shot that practically. Now, the way that we lit it, we used a Gemini 1x1 soft, and we put that in a Lantern 3, which is another DOP choice accessory here. And then you can see here that we have that skirt on the side, and the skirt allows us to shape that light while still having that direction and softness to it. Scored out the back of the cans, had a PA under the table, pulling a fishing line, which is what gave us that crushing look. We just taped electrical tape to the back wall because there weren't any lines that gave us that kind of leading shape, which then gives us that final look here. Andre, you're asking the right question too, so I'll get to your question as well. Let me answer Peter's first. Peter asks, how do you go about top mounting lights in small spaces? This is a huge issue for me. It was a huge issue for us as well. And if you go here and you look at this, right, you can see here, if we look at the direction of the shadows here, the shadow direction is going this way. And in ours, the shadow direction is coming much more across. So look at the length of the shadow on the Coke can here, and you look at the length of the shadow on the Coke can here. Our shadow is much longer precisely because we were in a space with low ceilings that didn't allow us to get the light as high as we would otherwise want it to. So if we're looking at our lighting plot here, we have our 1x1 Gemini Soft as high up until it's touching the ceiling as we could have it with that DOP Choice Snapback Lantern 3 foot on it. We skirted that lantern in order to cover the wall so we weren't getting a ton of spill on that wall. And then to Brian's earlier question here, we did throw a little Ultra Bounce coming in back on that side, and then used a Dana Dolly to give us that movement there. Okay, now, so that's why the shadows, while the behavior was the same, the lighting or the position of that lighting was not quite right. Andre asks, why is the background so much darker than in the original? Again, that's because this computer screws up the color on this. The color is much closer in real life in terms of the brightness here. Let's go here. This is from the iPad here, so you can see that the background's much lighter in this version than the one that's coming off of the computer. And that's just because the color rendition via the stream is not all that great. So there you go there. Again, if you do want to see the proper contrast exposure and color of this, go follow me on Instagram. I'm posting all of these on there, and you'll be able to get a much better idea for how that actually looks. But there you go there. Avila asks, how do you decide whether to adjust the intensity of the light or reposition the light further back or decrease or increase the light available in the shot? Can you please explain that a bit? Yes, great question. So we generally determine position by two things. One, lighting spaces, not faces. We want to make sure that we back the lights up enough that we can go through and film throughout an environment without having to break and reset every single shot, right? So that's number one. We want to make sure that our lights are far enough away that we're able to maneuver through a set without them getting in the way for every shot. That's always the first one. The next way that we determine that is by behavior. One thing I've said in almost every live stream, and something I will continue to say probably for every live stream, is buy the brightest, most accurate light your budget can afford, whatever that budget is, because anytime we modify a light, we're either losing the spread of the light or we're losing the intensity of the light or the brightness of that light. So by buying the brightest, most accurate light you can, it gives you a lot more flexibility and freedom in how you choose to modify that light. In the last live stream, we looked at, which by the way, go follow Light Panels on YouTube. They post all of these live streams. So if you missed the beginning, you can go back, you can watch the beginning. If you want to refresh, you could do that. Or if you want to see any of the other episodes that we've shot, all of that is on their YouTube. So please feel free to go follow them there. We talked in that episode, that last episode, about confidently shooting with exposure, right? Underexposing, proper exposing, overexposing, and how we go about doing that. So we did a real deep dive on how to go through and look at our exposure in that last episode. So I'm going to direct you, don't leave, right? Stay here, but I'm going to direct you over there because we do a real deep dive on how you can confidently shoot your exposures. And it all comes down to tools within monitors for that. Any alternatives to decrease the shadows in size? That's all going to come down to direction, right? The lower the light is relative to our subject, the longer the shadows are going to cast, right? Daylight, shadow, or noon, right? High noon, shadows are very, very, very short because there's a very directional position to them. Whereas if we're at dawn or dusk and the light is shooting across, we have much, much longer shadows. So shadow length is always, always, always indicative of the position of the light. Behavior, a little bit so, right? Obviously, the harder the light is, the harsher the light is, the more pronounced those shadows will be. The softer that light is, the more diffuse those shadows will be. But primarily, it's always going to come down to light position. Matthew says, do you prefer to use on-light modifiers rather than using bounce or larger silk frames? If so, do you have a reason for that? Matthew, no, yes, maybe. It depends. The way that I personally choose which modifiers I'm going to use is just by generally the available space that I have, and the amount of personnel. The nice thing with on-light modifiers, and I don't care if you're using panel lights or if you're using Fresnel style lights or you're using COB style lights, whatever lights you're using, the benefit of having an on-fixture modifier, like what DOP Choice makes, is that it requires very few people to set up and it requires very few people to operate. When we start introducing off-light modifiers, which of course give us a lot of versatility, that's when you're going to start to need more stands, more grip and rigging, more personnel, more setup time, right? You're introducing a lot more layers in your production. I'm a huge fan of off-light modifiers when I have the space, the time, and the budget to afford such. If I don't, on-light modifiers work great for most applications. Okay? Jacob says here, could you go further into lighting spaces and not faces idea? I feel like most lighting tutorials breakdowns focus on how to effectively light subjects directly. Yeah, Jacob, again, I'm going to direct you to past episodes, previous episodes. Specifically, the one I'm going to point you to is how we lit a bar scene. I think that might be actually the title of it, how to light a bar scene. It's both on Light Panels YouTube as well as mine. But the general idea is when you set up a lighting space, right, when we're filming in an environment, we want that environment to be able to withstand the moving and blocking of characters as well as the moving and blocking of camera. If I set up lighting where somebody looks really killer in a shot, but if I back that camera up 3 feet, all of a sudden I'm now getting fixtures in my shot. I'm now wasting more time by having to break and set every time I move the camera. So the general concept is you want to back everything up as much as you can, knowing what the blocking of your camera and the blocking of your characters are going to be. So if I know I'm shooting this direction, we're backing up, this is our widest shot, this is our tightest shot, right? I light for how wide and how movable I'm going to be or mobile I'm going to be in a space, and then adjust and tweak accordingly. It's not going to be perfect for every shot. I might have to throw in a bounce. I might have to bring in a net. I might have to scrim something. But doing little tweaks and modifications is going to be much faster and more efficient than having to break and set every single time I move the camera. Okay, Jared, the green tint was done in post. We shot everything neutral, right? That's general rule of thumb. You always want to shoot everything as neutral as possible. And then, we can introduce that Fincher-esque tint in post. Okay, we are rapidly running out of time here, as is usually the case. So there's 2 things I want to go over here real quick before we dive into any more questions. The first question, or the first thing I want to announce, is the winner. Okay, so the winner as chosen by Light Panels. Don't get mad at me. I didn't pick them. The winner is Jason Hawk. Jason, you are the winner of the 1x1 Soft Gemini and Snapbag. DM Light Panels on Instagram with your address and all of that. Go through, nobody else changed your profile to Jason Hawk. Jason won this thing. Let him have it. Jason, go through, DM them, let them know that you're the winner, give them your address and details, and they will coordinate with you on getting that to you. If you didn't win, if you're not Jason Hawk, which most of you in here are not, December, we are giving away another of this exact same kit, and Light Panels is doing another giveaway right now that you can enter for that. Yeah, big W's for Jason in the chat. Firm handshakes all around. All right, so now as we wrap this thing up, we are going to go into more questions. So if you have any questions, now is the time to get into it. Also, suggestions for the December scene recreation. If you got those, throw those up in the chat as well. There's a link right there to register for the Christmas special live stream where you can get another chance to win a Gemini. The only person in this chat that can't is Jason. Jason, you already won. You don't get another one. Okay, cool. So circling back to questions here, going back to the void scene. Is the black cloth used as a background and underneath the water? And if we use a black cloth underneath the water, should we cover it up with a glass or leave it wet, or alternatives for cloth? Yeah, the bottom of the reflection pool is not going to be cloth. That introduces far too many variables. Much more likely is it's going to be some sort of plastic, right? So something like what's the term? Like a carpenter or a contractor grade black plastic. It's almost like a painter's tarp, that kind of thing, but it's much, much thicker. Think like the black industrial like trash bags, but like huge amounts of them, right? So they would probably use something like that because A, you can tack it down to the floor really easy, B, it's not going to absorb any water, and C, there are no seams in it, so it's going to be a pretty even thing. What they would do if you're using practical water is that they would have the backdrop drop directly into the water. So then that way they can kind of avoid that space kind of between the two. But again, even under the best of circumstances, there's still going to be a fair amount of compositing in post. They're not going to be doing it principally in camera and walking away and saying, yeah, we're done. It's good, right? So you're still going to be doing some post manipulation, even if you are shooting in a large studio environment like that. Visqueen, Brian, thank you. Yes, that was the term I was looking for. Visqueen, 100%. Yeah, so that's how they would do it. That's what they would do there. Okay, Eric says, could the table be used to soften the shadows in the can scene, like a card, provided the talent doesn't get blinded by the light, of course? Yeah, you could offset that with lighting or illuminating kind of the surface a little bit more possible. Yes, again, when we're talking about how we want to light, we want to do the least amount possible. And that's not out of laziness, and it's not solely out of efficiency. Every time we introduce a new light fixture, we are complicating the way that the subject interacts within the environment, right? Because again, if we're backing our lights up, it's easier to back fewer lights than it is multiple lights, especially when we're talking about directionals like shadows and things. So yes, you could augment or supplement fill with introducing fixtures or bouncing off of the surface, but it is going to complicate the lighting to a degree where I don't think that the angle or degree of difference between the two would be enough to warrant or necessitate introducing multiple fixtures. Okay, that's just kind of personal ethos for me on that one. What is the most consistent and efficient way to get eye lights? Alec, great question. Eye lights or catch lights, right? That's a thing that's really, really important, and you can see it kind of in this one. It is what makes people feel and look most alive, right? We want to see that reflection in the glassiness of the fronts of eyes. There's a lot of ways you can do it. One, of course, is having the direction of the fixture be such that it catches in the camera lens, right? To where it's not going to compete, but it helps. But I've used things as simple as, again, if you go back to the last live stream that we did, in that live stream, there were a couple of shots because we were shooting everything super underexposed that I just pulled out my iPhone and I turned the flashlight on and I dimmed the flashlight as low as it could go. And I kind of found the way near the lens that wouldn't interfere with the lighting of my setup, but it was just enough that gave us a little bit of catch in both eyes, especially on the shadow side. So it really always comes down to the practicality of it, like what makes the most sense. Most of the time, I don't have to think about an active catch light, only because the way that the lighting is set up naturally within the environment produces that for me. There's a great breakdown, and I cannot for the life of me remember who did it, where they were looking at the movie Knives Out, the first Knives Out, which is a fantastic movie if you haven't seen it. But they went through and actually created faux window dressing cookies. And they used those bounces in strategic places within the environment because some of the characters were wearing glasses. And then in the glasses, they were getting the catch of what looked like windows or doors or whatnot because of these kind of cookie gobos that they created to reflect that light back onto them. So you can get as simple or as complex as you want to with those, but generally less is usually more in my personal experience here. Okay, so that is all I've got for you today. Again, big W's for Light Panels for hosting this. We have another one in December. Do please make sure you sign up for that. If you have any ideas and things, feel free to DM me on Instagram for scene recreations for December. I'm still trying to think through what we want to do for that. But it's going to be a great time. We're going to have a ball with that. So I'm looking forward to that. As always, it's my pleasure to do these things. I want to connect with you all online. So please do follow me on Instagram and YouTube, and do go subscribe to Light Panels YouTube as well. There's a bunch of fun ways that you can get discounts on lights and free lights right now, so engage with all of those. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.